Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session, a peek under the hood, what's really happening in your Microsoft 365 environment. My name is Joelle Palmer, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at CoreView. So before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping rules. First off, to avoid interruptions during the broadcast, all audience phone lines are on mute. In your audience panel, you may select to listen to this broadcast using your computer speakers, or you may select the telephone option to view the dial-in number. If time permits, our session will include a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. You may submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the questions panel located to the right of your screen. And finally, we'll email a link to the recording playback to all attendees on today's broadcast within the next few business days. And with that, I will pass it over to our CEO, Sean Langton. Sean, take it away.
Hey there, and thanks everyone for joining. Really excited to bring some of these latest insights to all of the attendees of this webinar and anybody who manages to dial in to watch it later. As Joelle said, I'm Sean Langton, CEO at CoreView, and I'd like to also introduce my co-presenter, Roy Martinez, one of our amazing solution architects and Microsoft 365 experts. Awesome, so let's go ahead and get into it. We assume that everybody here is an expert in Microsoft 365 yourself, that you are deep in the trials and tribulations of managing and keeping your own Microsoft 365 instance under control at your organization. And we've seen hundreds and hundreds of companies, customers that we've worked with, prospects that we analyzed but didn't end up partnering with. And we've aggregated all of that data, and we want to give you a peek under the hood of what everybody else is dealing with. Obviously, you know your own situation really well, and it's always a little bit of fun and pretty educational to see what other folks in a similar seat are doing. So where did we get this data from? As part of our typical sales process, we will run what we call a health check. CoreView, for those that don't know, is a control layer for Microsoft 365. We create one unified control interface for everything that admins do inside of Microsoft 365. And as part of that, we aggregate up every piece of data from inside your Microsoft 365 tenant. And that allows us to do things like segregation of duties, segmentation of the tenant itself, delegation of privileges, automation, visibility, and reporting that end up giving our customers huge benefits to efficiency and security. But long before we do any of that, this health check is a quick way for us to start to partner with our prospects early on in the process, get a look at their tenant, and show them their tenant through CoreView's technology in a way that often they've never seen before. So this does two things. They get to see it, and we add that data to our corpus of completely anonymized customer data that we've sort of analyzed to show you all today. In that process of health checking, we look at all kinds of elements of their tenant, including potential security gaps, as well as license optimization and usage of their Microsoft 365 licenses. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, of those two components. And of course, we get into much more detail as we go down the road with our prospects and customers. So who did we study? This data set represents 1.6 million Microsoft 365 users, and they are across North America and Europe, across state and local government, healthcare, education, as well as private sector commercial businesses. So really a broad swath of Microsoft 365 users, and these are the kinds of companies that we tend to serve. We typically work with mid to large enterprise companies. So you'll see companies represented in this data set from 40,000 employees, 40,000 being about the average, but we work with companies from 2,000 ranging up to 400,000 users in this data set, so quite a wide spectrum. First off, we want to start with common security issues. Security is top of mind for every IT professional, and it's top of mind for us and all of our customers, and you'll be a little bit surprised with some of the things that we found here. And we're going to start off with a quick poll just to get a sense for everybody's perspectives on the next few topics that we're going to cover. Joelle, can you take it away?
Thanks, Sean. So your poll question should be on your screen right now. I'll give you a couple of minutes to get your answers in. Which of the following should companies have in place? Strong password requirements, password expiration policies, multi-factor authentication, external email forwarding prevention, or all of the above? All right, thanks for your responses. John, I'll pass it back to you.
Right. So as folks went to answer this question, we saw what is typical, where there's a whole bunch of folks answering all of the above. A little bit of variation as folks checked the individual responses, but general best practices, all of the above. All of these things are important, and that we're going to touch on each of these today. And the surprising part is that because we all know that all of these are important, and because they're so basic and fundamental to IT security, you'd expect that this would be a no-brainer, that everybody would have this 100% nailed. So whether you do or whether you don't, spoiler alert, not everybody has this 100% nailed across our cohort. Let's start with passwords. I've been telling the same joke for 30 years that your password shouldn't be password. It certainly shouldn't be password for the last 3 years. And unfortunately, let's see some of the data. So to start with, let's talk about password strength. Only 17% of companies are requiring strong passwords for all of their users. 17%, so about an eighth, are requiring strong passwords for all users. Now, that can mean that you've got a few users that don't have it, and so you would fall into that 83% that are not requiring it for everyone. But why not? Why not require strong passwords for everyone? And this is something that we can very quickly identify and not only see that that is a potential risk, but zero in on the people for whom those strong passwords aren't required. So you can go make the adjustments. 10% of those companies have 1,000 or more users without strong passwords. So now we are way past the realm of we had one service that we gave a license and it's the coffee machine, and so we didn't think it needed a strong password. We're talking thousands of users that have, that may well have weak passwords because there's no strong password requirement in place. We all know that if you give users the option, passwords like password unfortunately still reign supreme. The other side of this is password expiration. So even if your password is password, hopefully you changed it since your AOL account got hacked last week. 90% of companies have at least one user without a password expiration policy in place. So again, huge portion have at least a few users where that's an issue. And again, this could be that one legacy app where you don't expire the password because then the intern has to come in on the weekend and change it, and nobody really knows how that legacy system works anyway. But then you flip over and 32% of companies, so almost a third, have 10 or more users without that password expiration policy in place. When you zoom all the way out and look across all 1.6 million company users that we analyzed, about 1 in 45 users, so a little more than 2%, don't have any password expiration at all. And so there's arguments on both sides of should password expiration really be the case, or should I just use a password that's 50 characters long and I lock it in a vault never to change it? The reality is that most people are not using a password that's 50 characters long with all the right capital and lowercase and numbers. And so changing it often is still a good idea. 2% of all users is a hacker's dream. And so that's really something that we want to help companies identify and lock the door on that type. Next, multi-factor authentication. What a pain, right? Every time I do anything, I've got to grab my phone and open an app and type a key and get a text, especially if you're an admin, because admins have no problems at all with these sorts of things. We know how to keep our passwords secure. We know what we're doing. Boy, what a mistake that is. And I think everybody, who is an admin without multi-factor switched on is groaning right now, because that's exactly the case. When we looked at the data on this, 22% of companies, so a little over a fifth, did not have any kind of multi-factor authentication for a third of their users. And we always do the double check, hey, are we not seeing this in Microsoft world because you're using Okta? No. That's a lot. That's a lot of companies to have 2/3 of their users totally unprotected. But users are users. What's the worst case that can happen if so-and-so downloads a smiley pack and gets hacked, and all of a sudden they're sending emails from a compromised account? Well, frankly, a lot. But what's worse is when admins are the ones without MFA enabled. So almost 90% of companies have MSA disabled for some or all of their admins. That's a huge number. And we all know the reason why. There's an admin account that we share, and so we don't want to put MFA on it because everybody's got we don't all have the same phone, or there's an admin account that is required to log in through a legacy system, again, as before with the password expiration. But these are things that we need to be really aware of, and especially as senior IT professionals, there can be lower level admins who are all sharing an admin account and nobody really talks about it. And the senior IT folks or the folks that are in charge of compliance and security at a company-wide basis, they would really rather know because it might be easy to fix if you just can have the visibility. 87% have MFA disabled for at least one. Over a third have, 42% have MFA disabled for over a third of their admins. So it's not just one or two admins. Now we're talking about 1 out of 3 admins at your company do not have MFA enabled, and that happens 40% of the time. So again, really surprising numbers given how important we all know multi-factor authentication is. So what does this mean? There's a few things that it can mean. One thing that we see quite often is that multi-factor authentication is not enabled at the user level because we're using conditional access. And every time somebody goes through conditional access, multi-factor is triggered. I'm safe, right? Not really. There was a recent string of attacks from the Russian group called Cozy Bear and this was just a few weeks ago, and their attack mode was to enroll users in MFA that were not already enrolled in MFA. So I'm a user. I always log in through conditional access. Via conditional access, I always use MFA. However, my basic Microsoft 365 account is not enrolled. Somebody in Russia is able to enroll their cell phone in Russia as my MFA token. And now they're logging into Microsoft 365, not through conditional access, just through my standard admin account. And they're able to get away with murder because I'm an admin. And that's why admin roles are the most critical. 88% of attacks are initiated through a elevated privilege account. So some type of admin. That's why it's really important to keep these things locked down. And when we do make conscious exceptions, it's really important to know where those conscious exceptions are made and even put a little snooze button on it so that we can say, hey, we're going to have to live with this for the next 6 months, but then we want to revisit it. Obviously, strong passwords and multi-factor authentication are a perfect pair. These are just 2 of the policies that everybody knows that everybody should have in place. And we've seen the data that says they're not in place as much as you would think. And even when they are in place in general, they're not in place where it really counts. So these are a little bit surprising, a little bit alarming. And of course, we'll talk about a few more through the course of this presentation, but this is making you wonder what your data says. That's why we run the health checks. The next piece that we talked about was email forwarding and email protection for malware. Email is great for collaboration. It's also great for malware. It's also great for data loss. So let's look at some of the factors around this that we were able to pull out of our benchmark data set. So first off, on email security, when we talk about that one user that had the password that wasn't strong, that didn't have MFA enabled, and they downloaded the smiley pack, and now they're blasting email that is actually malware out of your company domain, maybe you're not getting hacked, but this is huge reputational risk. Maybe your data is relatively safe, depending on the privileges of that one user, but this is not something anybody wants. And it's a flashing red light that should be able to be detected based on the security tools that we all have installed, because we're all using Microsoft 365, which can detect this right out of the box. The question is anybody looking at that flashing red light? And that's where a visibility platform, a control platform like CoreView can really help. 25% of companies we analyzed had at least one email containing malware sent from their domain within 7 days of us starting that health check. So a quarter of companies. Now, it's not surprising that hackers have infiltrated a quarter of companies or that malware and spam accounts reign. We all have inboxes. We know that there's a huge spam problem. But what's crazy is that 25% of companies probably don't know, because if they knew, they would have shut that down. We come in to do our health check, we offer them some additional visibility, we can point that out, and it usually triggers immediate action even before we've made a sale, just as part of the health check process when we're meeting a new prospect. 10% of companies had 25 of those emails in that 7-day period. So we know that this is something that's happening. 1 in 10 companies have a problem with this that is beyond just one person, and just one person is too many. On the other side of that, how many users are auto forwarding emails to external addresses? So this is every time Sean Langton at CoreView gets an email that immediately goes out to an external domain. Now, maybe there's a good reason for this. We're syndicating with Twitter or some other app or a legacy protocol that requires us to forward emails directly through some kind of automation we've set up. Person's out on holiday, they're forwarding to their personal mail. But again, almost 90% of companies are seeing data exit their organization to an external address all the time. Not necessarily a terrible thing, but you definitely want to be in control of that, have the list, understand who's sending where and whether or not that's an approved exfiltration, but approved loss of data from outside of your established security perimeter. And then the other side of that is, okay, so 87% of companies have some kind of auto forwarding going on. 72% of those, 72% of companies, so just a little bit less, have email forwarding to a free email domain. So it's not going to another tightly controlled, secure environment, your sister company, what have you. This is going to somebody's CompuServe account from the 90s that they still maintain because that's how they email their grandkids. And we can just not be certain as IT professionals that that email is secure on that free email domain. So we can detect both of these, but obviously both of these are huge issues that are really just running rampant across the enterprise. Next one I want to talk about from a security standpoint is this idea of failed logins. There's barbarians at the gate. We all know the world is full of hackers. They're coming from every country at every email all the time. That's why the good guys have to win all the time. The bad guys only have to win once. But which gate are they coming in at? And how do we know? And what do we do as a result? We have 140,000 failed logins per company per week across this data set. 140,000 is a lot, considering the average company in the cohort was 40,000 employees. So that's 3.5 failed logins per user per week. And those are not they're not evenly distributed, right? 5% of those companies were experiencing 1 million failed logins per week. And within those companies, those 1 million failed logins were not evenly distributed across their employees. They're targeting specific users. And the question for IT professionals is, do you know where? Do you know why? Do you know who? Because especially when we have old passwords, weak passwords, MFA not enrolled, malware is not being blocked, forwarding is allowed, this could be a huge problem. And so being able to quickly snap onto the visibility means that you can look for hotspots. You can track where hackers are hacking. You can look at where hackers are coming from so that you can harden different security parameters and policies that you have in place. You can encourage certain users without strong passwords or without MFA enrollment to go ahead and get that done. But the story that came to my mind, and I'm sure everyone's been following the news about the recent Uber hack and the Rockstar Games hack, 18-year-old kid, he used a pretty simple tactic, which was MFA fatigue. So this is where they attack the same user over and over and over with failed logins. So you may think, oh, failed logins, let them fail, who cares? Well, if they're attacking an individual, and we see this happen when we run health checks with our customers all the time. Hey, you had 5,000 failed logins, who cares? 3,000 of them were on this individual. And 2 of them were successful from Kyrgyzstan. Well, that's a problem. Let's go figure that out right away. Because even if you've done everything right and you have a strong password that's pretty fresh and you're using MFA, that 17th multi-factor authentication prompt on your phone, you're thinking, I don't know what's going on, fine, accept. And then they've got you. So we need to be alert whenever those failed logins become successful and whenever they're concentrated in a certain area, because that means that the hackers are up to something. And that's, again, visibility that's really hard to get natively, but really easy to get with a control tool like CoreView. So I will, at this point, hand it over to Roy to talk about one of the customers that he's helped with some of these very issues.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so this was a huge multinational organization. They had regions all over various countries. They will remain nameless, obviously, but I just wanted to highlight this use case because it shows kind of the value of this health check experience that we're referring to. Really uncovers things a lot of times these companies aren't even aware are issues. So right within our initial health check phases, we were able to immediately identify a whole host of users that had passwords set to never expire. Various users with external mail forwarding issues, as Sean just discussed, tons of undetected malware across a number of mailboxes. And keep in mind, we were in discussions because what they needed was to set up basic compliance protocols for preventing breaches around GDPR. For those of you that aren't aware, GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulations. basically controls data privacy and sovereignty issues around Europe. And they also were interested in maybe saving some cost on licensing. So they came to us with these two very specific goals. And through the course of our health check, we uncovered all these things they weren't even aware were issues. Well, what did that result in? What's the after? Well, after our initial setup, you want to go switch to the next one? We were able to, stop all that external malware, addressed all that malware through building into their processes, standards and practices to control that, put in standards to require password expiration for everyone. And this is just in the pre-sale phases before we ever traded a dollar. Once we got them on board and we started to go through our normal enablement phases, we identified tons more potential savings and ended up saving them close to 2 million in the issues that they came to us for. So it's just a really good example of the kinds of things that are constantly going under the rug, constantly going under the radar that can be brought to light through something like health check.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. And we'll see how we can even automate some of that really simply towards the end of this presentation as we get into a quick demo. The next topic that we wanted to touch on is around license optimization and the opportunities that that provides. So we're going to kick off this section with another quick poll.
All right. The next poll should be on your screen now. Once again, I will give you all a minute or two to get your responses in. All right. Sean, I'll pass it back to you to review the results.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so looking at this, everybody here is in the superstar camp, where about half of the population says less than 10% of hours are unassigned or inactive. You know, about 15-20% saying that they've got a decent amount of waste, and very few saying that there's more than 30%. But a good 1 in 5 are actually not sure, and we see that really often. In fact, it's almost always the right answer to say that I don't know, because really, how can you know? It's not something that Microsoft makes really easy to see inside of your tenant, and especially as organizations grow, if you're just a few hundred individuals, even a couple of thousand individuals, you might be able to get your arms around it. But as organizations grow through acquisition, through natural growth, we see a tremendous amount of fragmentation, and then things start to get lost. There can be politics around it. There can be well-meaning folks that just policies are not adhered to. So when we talk about license optimization, what do we mean? What are we talking about here? Seems like everyone's acknowledging that there's at least a little bit that's unused, and that's totally fine. But what we see, and for those of you who are familiar with Microsoft, you know that it's not a process by which you can raise your hand and turn some licenses in for cash. So what are we really talking about? Why do this in the first place? Well, we can all agree that the best case scenario is that you're paying for what you need and that you're using what you pay for. Pretty straightforward. It's a good way to be responsible stewards of our organization's limited resources when it comes to investing in what's frankly really amazing collaboration, security, identity software. But what we don't want to do is reserve new licenses if we have unused licenses sitting on the shelf. We don't want to upgrade licenses that haven't been used for a year and a half. We want to figure out where people are using the tools that we've paid for and drive adoption where they aren't using them so that we can get the full value of the subscription that we've paid for. And when you renegotiate with Microsoft, whether that's in an annual true-up or a EA renegotiation, or you're talking to your CSP to get a better sense for how many licenses you need, you just want to know all the facts. And knowing all the facts is a real challenge. And customers that we've talked to tell us that it can take, certainly hours, usually weeks, possibly months, to do the work that's required to actually know all the facts about what your usage is. And guess what happens by the time you've finished a months-long project about knowing all the usage? Everything's changed. So how do we figure that out in real time? And what are the opportunities that exist? Well, we've said before, in this data set, our average company has about 40,000 users. And the average company also has about 60,000 licenses. That means a third of licenses are unused on average. Now, there's two kinds of unused, and I think that they're actually very different. We look at unassigned as well as inactive. So unassigned is the licenses sitting on the shelf. If you look inside my pantry, there's a whole bunch of food sitting on the shelf that is unused, but I put it there on purpose. We're going to use it later. We know that we've got growth coming up. We know that we've got an acquisition that's about to happen. We know that we're onboarding 5,000 new such and suches at the end of the year, and we want to buy those licenses early to get prepared, to get better pricing, to have a fast and responsive IT team that provides a good end user experience, all good reasons. 22% of your entire license pool feels a little high as an unassigned on average. And so that's where we want to take a look and say, is that what you're shooting for? Or do people not know that there are big pools of unassigned? Or have we divvied up those unassigned buckets and put pantries in every department versus having one sort of central pantry that we can automate the license deployment from? The other category, which is about 11% of all licenses in our data set, are assigned to someone but have been inactive for over 90 days. This starts to be troubling. There are certainly people that are inactive for over 90 days. People go on sabbaticals and medical leave, and they have children and all of the right reasons why somebody's going to be inactive for 90 days on their assigned account. But 11% is high, and those are all exceptions that you'd want to manage closely to make sure that you're not wasting that money. So when we looked across the whole data set, 1 in 6 of the companies that we looked at had 10,000 unassigned licenses that were sitting on the shelf, and 1 in 10 had over 10,000 that were assigned but inactive. Now, if you think about the average cost of a license, assuming you have some Fs, some Es, some E3s, some E5s, that average cost is going to be $300 to $400 per year per license. So we're talking about 1 in 6 folks having 3 to 4 million sitting on the shelf of licenses, and 1 in 10 folks having 3 to 4 million totally unused, probably being wasted. And that is real money that you can deploy elsewhere to push the business forward. And that's really what we want to help our clients understand is, where can we do that? So just to quickly summarize this in a little bit more of a attractive chart here, what we're looking at is not, again, to say, hey, look, we found all this money and now we're going to go ask Microsoft for a refund. It doesn't work that way for a bunch of reasons. But what we can do is say, hey, look, are we reserving new licenses? If we are, let's stop the bleeding. Let's stop reserving new licenses if we've got 33% of our licenses unused, or 10% or 20%. If you're not sure, if you're one of the 20% of people that said, I'm actually not sure how many licenses are not being used, let's get that under control. Let's figure it out so you know the facts. Regardless of how much waste you have, the assignment and recapture of licenses, so assigning licenses when they're needed quickly and giving people the autonomy to quickly grab a license and get to work, that's really important for end user experience. But also, when that license is no longer in use, let's make sure that we can recapture it and put it in a shared pool where people can go reuse that license. And that's where creating visibility for that waste and delegating the responsibility for the waste becomes really important. So even in an organization where IT, maybe central IT, doesn't have the authority to say who gets a license when and whose licenses get reclaimed when, you're saying, look, this is going to be too much politics for me to actually get every single team to let me manage their licenses. That's one of the great things about what CoreView does, is we can create central authority, or we can delegate autonomy a bit to where it's needed. So we can create license pools that say, hey, you can add and remove licenses as you need them, but we are going to put together a dashboard of who's not using licenses, be at the bottom of that list. And the main thing is, you want to keep this clean so that you can negotiate with all the facts, whether you're negotiating with other department leaders, your boss, finance department, or Microsoft. Always good to have the facts on your side. Whoever's got the most data usually wins. The other piece that I want to talk about here is license usage. So we said, pay for what you need, use what you pay for. These are some of the license usage stats that we can really easily see. And this is very aggregated, but one of the things that we can do as we dive into a customer's environment is look very, very specifically by team, by role, by country, by business unit, you name it, to figure out where this license usage is strong and where the license usage is weak. And a lot of times there are policies that have been put in place that says, hey, we all use Teams as a chat tool. So we don't want any side chats on Slack, and we don't want any side chats on WhatsApp. It's a data loss prevention measure. It's also a collaboration and productivity measure. But then, of course, 35% of licensed users aren't accessing Teams. What's that about? And what's more, is that 35% across the board, or do we have little pockets where it's 0% and little pockets where it's 100%? And that gives IT the visibility they need to jump in and say, hey, we need to make some changes here, whether it's a new training program or carrots or sticks or both. But having the visibility to know where those issues occur in a really granular way is super important. Same thing with OneDrive. OneDrive is one that, Teams is, look, I've been using Teams for a long time. I really like Teams now. I think it's fun to use, and it's a way to, we have a great collaboration internally at CoreView and with our customers and our partners. OneDrive's a little bit harder, admittedly, and you can see that in the numbers. Only about half of licensed users are using OneDrive. And that's because old habits die hard. I like having things saved on my hard drive. You never know with the cloud, right? What if I'm on an airplane? But a lot of companies have policies that say, please do use OneDrive. We want to make sure that we have the ability to recover data if it's lost. We want to make sure that if your laptop takes a swim, you're still able to be productive. And so being able to spot that usage is really interesting. Even 15% of users not accessing Exchange, that's really surprising. So some of this comes back around to what type of license should that user have? And if we've made the decision that we're going to invest in E5s for everybody, maybe that's less of a concern, but we still want to understand who's using the productivity and collaboration tools that the company has invested in so that we can get the most out of that IT investment that we've made. I think I just talked over all my points on this page, so we'll skip past this, but really a lot of this is around, and what we've talked about from security perspective and a license optimization perspective, it's around policy compliance. We have security policies, we have usage policies, we have license management policies. Oftentimes we have regulatory compliance policies or just policies about the way that we work and the way that we treat each other, et cetera. Almost all of these touch IT in some way. And if you have the ability to automatically detect when you're out of compliance and automatically put yourself back in compliance, that's what we call continuous compliance. And that's really the goal. And it's something that really only CoreView can provide for folks that are invested in Microsoft 365. So I'm going to turn it to Roy for another quick case study.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so this is a really fun one. So I was personally involved with this right when I got on board. This is a huge organization, well over 300,000 users, seasonal turnover, a really big player. And we actually had a pretty long cycle with this particular client. We went through 2 different health check phases over the course of about a half a year. That preliminary health check, May of 2020, as it were, revealed an annual waste of close to $20 million, right? Now, that's a big number. So we had discussions just over the course of what we call a proof of value with this client. We went through some rings, talked through some things, showed them some capabilities with the tooling. Next time we did that health check, about 5 months later, that number had already changed to 13, just based on preliminary decisions we made on those findings. Now, what's the after? Shoot down the line to the next year, March of 2021, the total amount of reduced waste they're seeing over time has been up to like 61%. So we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 to $10 million in savings, essentially. Not so much savings, but cost repurposing. And they're continually working on reducing annual waste in other areas. So, we started out the gate with this license story, really banged them out, showed them how to turn that license story into a win. And now they're utilizing the same capabilities to find ways to cut waste in other departments, whether that be, object provisioning and resource provisioning, how they're onboarding things, how they're offboarding things, and so on and so forth. And it's been a really cool success story. And how do we do it? How do we fix all this stuff? Sean mentioned earlier this notion of continuous compliance. And we're really excited to kind of share one of the big major developments that's come out with CoreView recently in the form of something that we call playbooks. And this is helping us to fix things the easy way. So a playbook in CoreView is really just a collection of policies. And a policy, of course, is some measure of a key performance indicator that we care about, whether that's number of inactive licenses, whether that's number of failed logins from a particular time period, whether that's number of downloads of sensitive content from a particular SharePoint site or OneDrive, some key KPI that we care about tied to some level of automation for remediation, perhaps a workflow that will attest to the download of that particular sensitive content, or workflow that will go and reclaim licenses and put them back into that shared pool that Sean alluded to earlier. So the playbook is now a collection of relevant policies specific to a particular goal. And what's great about having this is that we end up with these dashboards, and these dashboards start to show us, if you want to just continue the next one here, these dashboards start to show us trends over time. So we set these policies into play. We have these automated remediation tasks to take care of these KPI concepts. And we can see in our dashboards, here's an example of a strategic dashboard that shows, if you look at the bottom right there, historical time that's been saved. So immediate ROI statistics from our particular use case. If you want to shoot to the next one here, we should see an operational dashboard that will show us general statistics about, how many of these work remediation steps have occurred in the past X number of days or months. How are things going on? This gives us a picture of that continuous compliance concept. So we can see in seconds how continuously compliant are our systems. Where are we at? How are we doing? It's a really wonderful thing. We're all really excited about it. What's cool about it is everything's completely customizable. So in this example, we're seeing all the different buttons and sliders that we can change to control what exactly will happen in those remediation steps. When I do see X number of failed logins, what steps are going to be taken? How often are they going to be taken? Who's going to be notified when the steps happen or if they fail? Things of this nature. And then to add to that, we can actually create our own playbooks. So you can customize really anything that your heart desires in terms of a defined goal for compliance, some sort of key performance indicator that is relevant to your use cases. Not every enterprise is built exactly the same. There are certainly tons of things that we can broad stroke for everyone, but every enterprise is going to have its own specific unique goals. GDPR is a great example. Point is, we've got this wonderful new capability called Playbooks. It's making our customers really, really happy, the people that we're piloting with. It's showing us immediate return on value, and we think it's going to be the next chapter in what makes CoreView a really amazing solution to help to get to those governance and continuous compliance goals.
Absolutely. As Roy said, we have taken everything we've learned from all of these hundreds of customers that we've worked with, some of the insights we've shared with you in today's presentation, and we've really distilled those down to say, what are the policies that best practice organizations are using? What are the ranges of acceptable behavior that we would recommend, but also made it really easy for you to go in and adjust those yourself. So it's everything that we would have done with a customer over the course of maybe a month-long onboarding pulled into just a few hours so that you can get to value that much faster and start getting everything under control.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So I've seen a few of you inputting questions. So thank you for sending those over. As a reminder, if you have not sent us your question yet, you can use the questions panel located to the right of your screen. So I'm going to go ahead and hop into some of these. The first question that we have is from Daniel. It says, our team runs a lot of PowerShell scripts on a monthly basis. I'm concerned that's introducing risk into our environment. Is CoreView able to replace some of these scripts? If so, how does that work? And Roy, I'm actually going to pass this one over to you to start us off.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a really cool point. So PowerShell is the legacy method of automating an environment and keeping things tidy, and it can get really haywire when you have tens, dozens, 20s, 30s of administrators out there, each with their own set of PowerShell scripts that they utilize for their administrative tasks. It's a wonderful system, but it can get unruly. Yes, there absolutely are capabilities within CoreView to allow you to kind of ingest that PowerShell library, so to speak, into the CoreView platform and turn it into delegatable, buttons, if you will, that you can then delegate out to your workforce. It serves really two things. It controls and centralizes your PowerShell library, but it also allows you to farm out the use of PowerShell scripts that are high level to folks that maybe aren't a PowerShell wizards, right? So buttonizing it means I can delegate that out to my tier 1 help desk operator. He can now take advantage of those admin scripts without the razzle dazzle of a PowerShell degree. And furthermore, it's more secure, right? So everything's under control, everything's in one place. We have total auditability and trackability. So yeah, it's a big win.
You can also automate those to kick off whenever an out of compliance state is detected versus just running the monthly. So if you are waiting to block external email forwarding, that's happening right away versus 15, 30 days later.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So this next question came from Sebastian. Sebastian asked, where did you get the benchmark data for your stats? Is this a survey done for all CoreView customers before they implement the tool?
Yes, so this is, as I said at the beginning, the data comes from our health check. And as Roy mentioned, the health check is often part of our sales process. We actually do this for free for all qualified customers who are interested in CoreView and are taking the time to really go through the sales process with us. We'll connect to the tenant, to the customer's tenant, at this point, a prospect's tenant. We have a read-only version of our connection that we can make so that nothing can go wrong and accidentally cause any issues. And then through that read-only connection, we'll be able to pull in all that data. And then usually as part of that sales process, before we've, as Roy said, before they've ever traded a dollar for the insight, we're able to share a lot of this information with them and show them their own tenant in a way that feels brand new, often quite illuminating, maybe sometimes surprising. And then from there, we will usually save that snapshot data as part of our benchmark toolset, and then we work with the customer to solve all the issues that we've spotted through the course of our engagement.
Awesome. Roy, do you have anything to add to that? If not, I can go ahead and hop to the next question.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that, again, just to emphasize Sean's notion that this is completely read-only, the data that we pull back is not like content, it's just pure metadata and attributes from the tenant. And of course, any customer can opt out of having that saved down if so desired. So we do try to stay in line with GDPR mandates where applicable.
Awesome. So this next question came from Jose. Jose asked, how can CoreView help with license chargebacks, if at all? And Sean, I'll pass this one to you.
Yeah, so I'll take it, but I might get Roy to give some details as well. The short answer is tremendously. It can help tremendously with calculating chargebacks. So, I often will call CoreView a control layer or a visibility solution, right? What we really offer is the ability to see everything that's happening inside your environment and then automate your preferred response, whether that's just waving a flag saying, hey, something's going on over here, building a report, or actually remediating the issue right away. So in the case of chargebacks, it's mostly around visibility and creating the reports, and in some cases, automating those reports so that it's not a surprise when you go to the department head at the end of the quarter and say, hey, do you know you have all these licenses that you used? And you're still using all those Power BI licenses from last year? They know because they're getting a weekly report saying, here's everything that we're going to charge you back for. Here's the sum of that over the last few weeks, months. And that process, which customers tell us is an insane investment of time and nobody's really sure about the correct answers and everybody's fighting about it, becomes automated and easy with CoreView. So Roy, if you want to share any more specific examples, please go for it.
Yeah, sure can. Actually, I'm going to share a bit of a technical example of a feature set within CoreView that assists in this endeavor. We have something that we call license pools, which will allow you to take a global pool of licenses and essentially segment it down and tie that segmented license pool to a particular department or agency or business unit so that you can get rich reporting that shows you exactly what the license footprint is on a department by department or agency by agency basis, with all the costs built into that, with all the calculations built into that, make it really, really simple. If you've ever worked with, if any of you are licensed administrators out there, you know that most of your life is spent in an Excel spreadsheet and it's not ideal, some of the reporting that's available. So this kind of reporting we've seen to be very, very popular and valuable to our client base. So absolutely.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we actually got another question in from Sebastian. Sebastian asked, what is your recommendation for break glass accounts? Microsoft suggests to create these, but what is your stance on them? Roy, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm urging to take this one because I just recently had this discussion with one of our clients in a security discussion we had. But yeah, so these break glass accounts or fireman accounts or however you want to call them, right? These are like the set aside, only enabled in time of need accounts that are basically there in case the tenant blows up or a meteorite hits the data center, or whatever the case may be. We have that back pocket play. As far as our stance, certainly as a Microsoft partner, we think that whatever Microsoft recommends is probably the best practice that should be gone with. I have personally assisted customers with utilizing CoreView to automate these processes. There's also things like PIM out there, PIM, that can do like kind of on-demand account rights adjudication. But whatever methodology you go with, whatever technology you use to accomplish the goals, I think it is a good idea to have break glass accounts. The trick of it is they need to be impenetrable, right? They need to be completely secure and untouchable until such time as that glass is broken. So that's a whole discussion we could probably spend an entire hour on. But just to put it out there, we do work with that concept. I have built automations around that concept. It's something we're familiar with. So hopefully that's
And the break glass account and only using it when the glass is broken. It's important to put it back in the glass after you're done and
heal
have
that
it,
glass up. Yep.
you know, we use this for 8 hours on September 22nd, and then we put it back in the glass after everything was under control again, and we can provably say that that's where it remains.
Yeah, and also have an independent audit track for that particular account. So yeah, all these things, again, it could be an entire discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. The next question that we have is from Sherry. So Sherry said, I think this was touched on, but what options does CoreView offer for actual remediation of security issues? For example, if I identify failed logins or sensitive content downloads, what can I actually do about it? Roy, you were nodding your head, so I'm going to pass
Yeah,
it to you for
so much.
this.
Sorry. So I anticipate that this question probably came in just before I talked about the playbooks. Obviously, playbooks is our new big play, so to speak, for this particular idea. Just being able to build out policy-driven compliance protocols. But some other things that we offer in the tool, just to name a couple, we have this wonderful notion of audit alert reports. And an audit alert report is an event-based triggering system. A lot of this is built into the playbooks notion today. But just to give you a sense of the legacy, being able to trigger anything you want to happen on an event-based basis from an audit log, tons of automation capabilities that go beyond the playbooks notion. So I guess my blanket statement is if CoreView is nothing else, it's incredibly flexible and able to rise to the challenges that our customer base has given us. This is why, as Sean mentioned, we're distilling all that experience we've had over the course of however many years, building out these automation solutions into this new playbooks concept. So I think playbooks is the de facto answer moving forward. But again, just to give you some color on some of the other things that led to this.
Yeah, I think the way that I'd phrase that, Roy, and tell me if I get this wrong, is, we are able to either schedule a KPI report like all users that had more than 50 failed logins in the last day and schedule that report daily, or watch the unified audit log to say, if I see something, if I see files being downloaded by an external user, then I want to immediately kick off an action. So we will know, CoreView will know as soon as it hits the audit log, and CoreView can take any action you like, whether that is lock that down and then send a workflow that asks an IT administrator for approval, or to notify someone, or to write that to a different kind of log file, or to kick off an email report so that somebody can check on it based on the level of perceived severity for whatever we've detected. But that ability to watch the audit log all the time and to have these scheduled reports running at a periodic interval. So if it's something that's not that risky, is just sort of something you want to keep an eye on, like unused licenses, maybe we check that weekly. If it's something that's more security related, you might want to check that hourly or instantaneously. As soon as it hits the audit log, we're going to go for it.
Awesome. So this is probably the last question we have time for. For those of you who input questions that we didn't get to during the session, we'll follow up with you individually after the event. So the last question here is from Marcus. So Marcus asked, can CoreView enforce compliance policies? How does it compare with native compliance and security center? Sean, I will pass this one to you to start us off.
Well, I'm going to shuffle that right back over to Roy, because I think that Roy will know best all the details of how that compares with Microsoft's native compliance center.
Absolutely. I think the way that I tend to speak to this, because we don't by any means aim to replace what's available in the native security and compliance, or I guess I should call it Purview now, it's Purview. But we don't aim to replace those capabilities. And frankly, a lot of what our compliance solutions are aimed at is the operational layer. So I think we aim to augment. So our solution is an augmentation to the existing capabilities. And I think we fit nicely in line with what Purview and Security and Compliance Center's existing policies provide. We just give that extra zhuzh to allow you to customize beyond what's natively available. As for the details of what exactly that means, I urge anyone who's interested to give us a ring since we're coming short on time. Let's get a conversation going. I'd love to kind of show you exactly what I mean and kind of walk you through those steps.
The other place where we draw sort of a philosophical line as CoreView is, and Roy alluded to this earlier on the question of what's collected in our health checks, we only collect metadata. We never collect content of emails. We never collect content of files. We don't want to know that. And that's, we say, hey, look, Microsoft is hosting all of these files for you. They have built all the hooks and wires to make sure that you can search that and understand it and do compliance and governance on the content of the files. And that's where we see Purview having the most benefit of keeping you in compliance with, hey, no social security numbers are shared, or this language is appropriate, or what have you. CoreView never does that. We don't plan to do that. But what we do is everything on the other side of that, everything with the metadata in terms of policies that say these types of files shouldn't ever move, or this type of user should have this sort of password, or these types of licenses should be always in use, et cetera. So it's a matter of which set of compliance tools are we after. Everything on the content, knowing what's inside the files and what's inside the email side, Microsoft does that, and they have taken custody of that data, and we have to trust them with it. CoreView doesn't take that custody, and we've really worked hard to make sure that every other policy imaginable is one that we can keep in continuous compliance.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up our time today. Thank you, Roy and Sean. I think you guys provided a lot of insights there. And also thank you to everyone who joined the call today. I hope that this was a useful session for you guys, that there were practical benchmarks and takeaways for your organization. If you're looking to learn more about CoreView, please go to coreview.com. And if you're looking to book a demo, you can visit www.coreview.com/request-a-demo. It's a mouthful. But if you go to the CoreView website, you should see that button up in the top right-hand corner. But I hope that you guys have a great morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're located. And we hope to see you on our next webinar. Thanks.